I'm Phillip Campos, and today I'm going to be refuting Ms. Kristen Pringle's claim of back speech about video games. So there have been many opposing views presented concerning the effects of video games. Some argue that video games are beneficial in developing cognitive abilities, while others condemn video games for promoting violence. My opponent argues that people who play video games are more cognitively dexterous than those who do not play them. She backs her argument with the minor claims that gamers have better hand-eye coordination or reaction time. Secondly, that video games improve critical thinking skills. And finally, that video games improve decision-making skills. I will admit that there is indeed a wide consensus that video games do help to promote mental dexterity. However, there are many drawbacks associated with video games that outnumber the positive effects that my opponent advocates. And so the three main setbacks of video games that I'm going to be examining today are that one, excessive amount of time spent playing video games correlates to poor academic performance in school. Secondly, that a majority of video games contain violent content that has been shown to desensitize players to real-life violence. And thirdly, that violent video games tend to influence aggressive behavior in players. So the first problem associated with video games is that video games frequently correlate to poor academic performance in school. In fact, many studies have shown a negative relationship between video games and grades. Studies that date all the way back to the 1980s all the way up to the 2000s. According to a study published in the journal Adolescence, the average American child ages 2 to 17 spends about 7 hours a week playing video games. More specifically, adolescent girls average about 5 hours a week playing video games, while adolescent boys average about 13 hours per week playing video games. While this number may not seem too significant, any time spent engaging in video games cuts into study time necessary to achieve the decent grades in school. As the results of the study suggested, more hours spent playing the video games resulted in lower academic achievement. Going back to my opponent's main claim, sure, gamers can be more cognitively dexterous than non-gamers. However, they fail to demonstrate it in their schoolwork, which can lead to more negative consequences in their future. So, my second point is that the majority of video games contain violent content that desensitizes players to real violence. According to a statistic taken from childnow.org, 85% of video games contain some sort of violent content. So much exposure to violence has been shown to immune video game players to violence overall. So much in an experiment examining the effects of video games on physiological desensitization to real-life violence, participants played violent and non-violent video games for 20 minutes and afterward watched a 10-minute video containing real-life film scenes of violence. As they viewed the video, their heart rates and galvanic skin response to the scenes of violence were measured. The results showed that participants who played the violent video games were less aroused by the real-life violence scenes than those who did not play the violent video games. This illustrates that people who play violent video games become immune to real-life violent situations. They lack the ability to distinguish reality from fantasy and begin to treat both situations similarly. This is a major concern because video games can take away people's ability to empathize with others who are experiencing real pain and suffering. I think this is a major issue to be considered before embracing the improved cognitive abilities that video games may promote. And lastly, video games tend to influence aggressive behavior in players. Many studies have found a correlation between violent video games and aggressive behavior. For example, one study published in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin for 2014 revealed that playing violent video games increases aggressive behavior and decreases pro-social behavior. And another journal of adolescence also confirmed that adolescents who play more violent video games were more likely to engage in hostile behavior. And another study from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology showed that playing violent video games increases access to violent and aggressive thoughts. And the list goes on and on. So while there is a wide consensus that video games help with mental dexterity, there's also a wide consensus that video games influence aggressive behavior. So I hope by pointing out the drawbacks of video games, I have influenced you to reconsider what video games really have to offer. Even if video games do promote mental dexterity, there are better means of going about strengthening your cognitive abilities, such as reading, building, or even learning a new skill. In the end, the positive effects of video games, such as mental dexterity, is minimal in comparison to all the negative effects associated with video games. Thank you.
All right, Philip, I think at the beginning when you specify what the advocate's secondary issues are, that's pretty much the last we hear of the arguments that the advocate presented. You basically concede that there is some cognitive dexterity that comes as a result of playing those games. I do think that there are some challenges that you could make about those issues that would then put your arguments in a little bit more of a context. So, for instance, that somebody can consider an extra issue in 1/10 of a second faster than they would otherwise. Why is that a big advantage? I think you need to do a little bit more to diminish the value of this claim that's being presented by the advocate, which, by the way, I'm not sure was ever quantified. How much faster it is, that there is this relationship, and what's the advantage of having that sort of thing? Because ultimately that's what you're asking us to do, is compare the advantage to potential disadvantages that we're going at. And without having some standard by which we can make that measurement, it's hard to reach an unbalanced conclusion. I think that there are a couple of places where you have the right idea in your argument, where you're trying to apply these ideas to the mental dexterity issue. For instance, on the first point, when you're talking about academic achievement, at the end you say, well, cognitive development is, it's not showing up in their schoolwork. And I think that that's a good way to put it. I said, in essence, so they develop, some additional cognitive dexterity. And how are they using it? To get better at playing video games, as opposed to learning to do something that is productive, enhancing their intellectual ability, improving other skills that they have. Is there any demonstration from the advocate that those skills were in fact enhanced by playing these games? No. The only evidence is that, if we measure them by their ability to play the game, well, they're so much better. But do we have any information that says that they are more capable of making good decisions, that sort of thing? No, we don't have that. What we do have is their grades have gone down and their efforts are diminished in some way, shape, or form. And I think then your argument applies a little bit more. You are right on the brink of making that argument. You just need to take an extra step in order to make it apply. And the same sort of thing on a couple of other points too. You at the end of each of those points, I think you are trying to find a way to make it link back to that idea of mental dexterity, and you're just kind of missing, and you just end up relying on the counterclaim of some harm. But if we don't have some way to measure that harm in comparison to whatever advantage the advocate is saying, that's a bit of a problem. And if you're not applying it directly to the arguments that the advocate made, that's a little bit of a problem. And I think, again, you might be conceding too quickly that there's a lot of studies that say this. That might be true. Nobody's asking you to say that that's not true, that there aren't studies. But let's put it into a context. So what does this mean in the long run? Do any of the studies explain how this is a benefit to anybody? That it produces a desirable effect, that it is something, therefore, that is worthy or deserving of pursuit? I think those are legitimate questions to ask, and those are just questions without even having to make the argument. You don't ask those questions. So I think that that's a little bit iffy. But I did like the counter evidence that you came up with, and I thought you had interesting counterclaims, like I said, and the way you phrased them was right. All right, thank you.